I'm particularly excited for this afternoon's event. We're joined by Marion Orr and Congressman Butterfield to discuss Orr's newest book, House of Diggs. House of Diggs is the first biography of Congressman Charles C. Diggs Jr. Congressman Diggs was Michigan's first Black member of Congress. He founded the Congressional Black Caucus, was the only elected official to attend the trial of Emmett Till's murderers. Congressman Diggs was the primary architect in establishing home rule here in Washington, D.C., and almost single-handedly ignited the American anti-apartheid movement. Marion Orr is the Frederick Lippitt Professor of Public Policy and a Professor of Political Science and Urban Studies at Brown University. Orr will be in discussion with Congressman Butterfield. Butterfield's a retired U.S. Congressman, formerly serving North Carolina's 1st District for over 18 years, where he was the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, as well as an early supporter of President Obama. As a Michigander and a political enthusiast, I'm particularly excited for this event, so please join me in welcoming Marion Moore and Congressman Butterfield.
Testing. Good afternoon. It's very unusual that I participate in a program at 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, but that should demonstrate just how passionate I am about the conversation that we're going to have today. I am former Congressman G.K. Butterfield, represented the 1st District of North Carolina for 18 years, retired 2.5 years ago. Before that, I was a judge in my home state for 15 years. So I've been on the battlefield for a long time. When I was elected to Congress in 2004, I was determined to quickly affiliate not just with the Congressional Black Caucus, but with members of the Congressional Black Caucus, because I knew their history, I knew that they were the conscience of the Congress, and it was just my honor to be a part of the caucus. Several of the founders of the caucus were there when I arrived, including Charles B. Rangel, who recently passed a few months ago, and Charlie became a dear friend as the years went on. So I'm delighted today to join Dr. Orr. I want to thank him publicly for his scholarship. He just didn't write this book in a few months. It has taken a decade for him to get the final copy to you today. And so I'm delighted to lead this conversation, and we're going to get started in just a moment. But as a former chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus during the last 2 years of the Obama administration, I just want to say that the Congressional Black Caucus is now engaged in the fight of its life, not for its own survival, but for the survival of the country. So I have a few questions that I jotted down, Dr. Orr, and we're not going to take these in any particular order, but at least I'm going to take one just to get it started. And when Congressman Diggs came to Congress, there were already 2 African Americans in Congress, William Dawson, who was a lawyer from Chicago, and Adam Clayton Powell, Jr., congressman from Harlem. I had an opportunity to know Congressman Powell. I was with him when Martin Luther King was assassinated. He was on my campus when I was in undergraduate school, and we were together when the news came that Dr. King had been assassinated. And so I spent the day with him and actually took him to the airport after the assassination. And so when Congressman Diggs came to Congress, he was sandwiched between these 2 personalities, Adam Clayton Powell, who was at the far left, and Dawson, who was center right. And so my question to you is, people certainly remember Congressman Powell and Dawson as the faces of Black leadership after World War II. But what makes Congressman Diggs more consequential in your eyes as a researcher? So much so that you wrote this first full-length biography of him.
Well, first of all, thank you, Congressman Butterfield, for being here this Saturday afternoon. I appreciate you and your support.
At 3 o'clock.
At 3 o'clock. Thank you very much. And thank you, all of you, for being here this afternoon also. I'm thrilled to be here. As the Congressman said, it took me over a decade to do the research and to write this book. And I was just thrilled to write it. And as I began to accumulate the data and the evidence on Congressman Diggs, it became pretty clear to me early on in the process of pulling this research together that this was an individual that had been sadly almost forgotten. When I began to dig into the contributions he made, and I thought about the other members of Congress, not only the black members, but quite frankly, many other members, this guy stands out in terms of the tangible legacy that this man left. And it's no accident, no accident. I discovered from talking to your former colleagues, Rangel, Conyers, Dellums, Stokes, Bill Clay, I had access to the people who work with this guy. All of them said that Diggs worked hard, that he was a serious, policy-oriented legislator. So when he arrived in Congress in 1955, GK, he arrived and he never looked back. I mean, here's a guy whose legacy we can feel even today. When I look and when I come here and I turn on the television and I look at Muriel Bowser, Charlie Diggs. Because Diggs was the congressperson who restored, and let me underscore the word restored. Most people don't know, we used to have home rule in this city until Reconstruction. And for 100 years, the president appointed the leadership in this city. Charlie Diggs pushed through the home rule bill that many of you probably now have heard so much about. So his legacy is present. I just drove down Connecticut Avenue. The University of the District of Columbia was brought on by legislation by Charlie Diggs. He is the father of UDC, okay? The Congress mentioned the Congressional Black Caucus. He was, and the documents on this is very clear, he wasn't just one of 13 founding members. It's pretty clear he was the visionary and the founder of what is now the Congressional Black Caucus. So now I like to distinguish, certainly they all were the founding members, but this guy was the one who said, we should do this, and here's how we're going to do it. And finally, let me just add, there were 13 members then. Mm-hmm. Now, GK, we're talking some 62 members now of the Congressional Black Caucus, and they're perhaps one of the most influential political organizations, black political organizations in the country. And finally, many of us in this room connect the anti-apartheid movement in this country to the 1980s and 1990s. Congressman Diggs was talking about apartheid in the 1950s and 1960s, okay? He was the visionary for what became Trans-Africa, the widely known anti-apartheid organization. It was Diggs' vision in the 50s that we, as Black Americans, ought to have, and he's quoted in speeches saying, Black Americans ought to have an organization that will lobby on behalf of Africa the same way Jews had organizations lobbying for Israel in the 1950s. So let me just say, I deliberated about this question of consequential because I know people would raise, because you're making a claim. I staked that claim, and I believe the book documents very clearly that this guy was someone who was just a remarkable American leader.
Thank you. You mentioned Reconstruction, and I am a Reconstruction scholar, an amateur Reconstruction scholar, I might say. But we all remember that after the Civil War, African-American men became registered voters. And throughout the South, 20 African Americans were elected to Congress. But all of that came to an end in 1900 with the poll tax and the literacy test. And after that, African Americans, felt isolated in the South. They were certainly discriminated against. And so the Great Migration started, as I recall, in 1910. And Charles Diggs's father was among one of the first immigrants to leave Mississippi and travel to Detroit. And that was the beginning of a long period of political empowerment in the city of Detroit. My research said that in 1910, 1% of Detroit was African American. In 1950, when Charles Diggs was really coming into his own, it had grown to 15%. And by 1960, it was 30%, and then 45%, and now it's more than 60%. But what stood out to me in reading your book, and I might say I read it in 3 days. My wife would tell you that's probably a record because I'm easily to get distracted. I like to read 15 or 20 minutes at bedtime and then go to sleep. But in the book, it says that Papa Diggs organized a train to bring supporters and constituents from Detroit all the way to Washington, D.C. to see his son get sworn into Congress. That is remarkable. When I was elected, I brought 30 people on a bus from North Carolina. That's incredible. What do you think that tells us about who he was and the love that the people in Detroit had for Papa Diggs and for Congressman Diggs?
Well, thank you. Let me say this. The title of this book, House of Diggs, is taken from the name of the funeral home that the family owned and built. It was at one point the most prosperous Black mortuary in the nation. If you lived in Detroit in the 40s, 50s, and indeed the 1960s, and you died, you would be buried by the House of Diggs. They buried more than half of the Black Americans who died in Detroit. The funeral home was built by Charles Diggs Sr., the father, and his wife. And the father always gave credit to the wife as being a strong supporter, that it was a business that he could not have built had it not been for his wife, Mamie Diggs.
And he was a son of Mississippi.
That's right. He came up from Mississippi with literally nothing.
And half the people in Detroit were from Mississippi and Alabama.
That's right. And here's the deal, Congressman.
Yeah.
The name of the House of Diggs became so popular because many of the Blacks who died in Detroit were from the South, and they wanted to be buried back South. And so the name of the funeral home was around the southern parts of the nation because the Black Detroiters, they wanted Diggs to embalm them and take care of them, but their bodies would ship back to Mississippi or Georgia or Alabama. So Black folk in the South were quite aware of this thing called the House of Diggs, which was an institution in Detroit in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. It supported community causes. They supported Little League sports tournaments in the city. The Diggs name was like gold in Black Detroit in the 40s and 50s. These weren't people who were taking advantage of Black folks. His father was a tremendous businessman, but he was a generous soul, okay? Very generous soul. The father parlayed the success of the funeral home into electoral politics, okay? And went on in 1936, Charles Diggs Sr. became the first Black man elected to the Michigan State Legislature as a Democrat in 1936. And he was an amazing man. In fact, I think my next biography may very well be on Charles Diggs Sr. because I've got so much information on the father. He was a fascinating guy who was significant in Detroit for about 30 or 40 years. By the way, he killed himself. You got to read it in the book. So the father gets into trouble, and he goes to prison. Let me just say that real quickly. And he comes back. Listen to this. He comes back out of prison. Let me just add, he always claimed that he was innocent, and he argued that he was being harassed by a white power structure. He always maintained his innocence. He came back out of prison after 15 months, ran for his old seat, and he won. That's how popular and respected he was, okay? The white Republicans would not seat Charles Diggs Sr. in this election because of his previous record. So the seat became vacant. And guess who ran for his seat? You got it, Charles Diggs Jr. And that's how Charles Diggs Jr. got his start into politics, taking up the vacant seat of his father in the state Senate. He would stay in the state Senate for 3 years, and then he would run for Congress, and he would never, never look back.
Dr. Orr, let's evolve into a conversation about political philosophy. When Charles Diggs stood in the well of the House and took the oath of office, there were 2 other African Americans there. There was Adam Clayton Powell, who had been elected 2 years earlier. There was William Dawson, who had been elected 10 years earlier. But Dawson and Powell had very divergent personalities. Powell was a pastor and very aggressive. Dawson was more complacent. He was a lawyer. Dawson was originally from Georgia. Powell had grown up in Connecticut. And so he found himself sandwiched between 2 African-American politicians who one to his left and one to his right. But the other members of the House of Representatives at the time would the following year sign what was called the Southern Manifesto, because when Diggs was given the oath of office, well, he was elected in November of 1954. Emmett Till was killed the next year. The Brown versus Board of Education had just taken place 2 months before the Diggs primary, and so it was a very volatile and very difficult landscape. And so Diggs had to get into the House and to establish himself. He had to develop his niche, if you will. And what I've read throughout your book and the literature that I've read is that he was a strategic moderate. What in the world does that mean? What is a strategic moderate?
Yeah. Well, I make the observation in the book, Congressman, that Diggs had to figure out as a member of Congress, and let me emphasize this, there were 435 members of the House in 1955. 3 were black. 435, and 3 African Americans, 3 Negroes, okay? So you have to figure out, Diggs did, as a numerical minority and a racial minority, how do you maneuver in this institution called the Congress? Let me emphasize very clearly that Diggs was a race man to his heart. He loved black people everywhere, poor, all to the elite, and he loved black people in Africa. He loved black folk, okay? He had to figure out, as a Congress member, how am I going to maneuver through this institution called the Congress? And he decided that he was not going to be the vocal, militant radical in name of Adam Clayton Powell, nor was he going to be the silent person on race like Congressman Dawson. No, he said, I'm going to become a strategic moderate. And let me tell you what I mean by this. Now, in today's language, moderates use that language to distinguish themselves from the extreme wings of their party. I'm a moderate. This is not what I'm saying about the congressman. The congressman was a moderate in the context that he believed in the 50s and 60s that we as black Americans had to have the full spectrum in our coalition. So Diggs strategically said, I'm going to work with conservatives, I'm going to work with radicals and try to bring them into our fold, because as a racial minority and a numerical minority, we had to have a broad coalition. So you see in the book, for example, how I lay out how he worked with the black radicals in the 1970s at the Gary Convention in 1972. Many members of the Congressional Black Caucus were very, very skeptical about working with the black radicals, but Diggs understood this, that if you could bring the black radicals into the Democratic fold, you increase the power of the black community. And if you think about it, that's really what happened. Black radicals of the 60s and 70s came into the Democratic Party. One of them was a man named Jesse Jackson, who eventually would run for president under the Democratic ticket. Bobby Rush, who was a Black Panther, a black radical, brought into the fold as a Democratic congressman from Illinois for several. You probably served with Bobby Rush, I'm assuming you did. Yes, yes. So Diggs' approach was that we Black Americans had to have this broad tent. And so when I say he was a strategic moderate, I emphasize that he was a race man, but he was also a congressman. And he was a rational, pragmatic, strategic congressman. Okay? And he didn't care if people, said things about, we can talk about this later, like the Home Rule Bill, for example. There were some people who wanted more. They wanted statehood. But Diggs understood that you could not get statehood through the Congress in 1972. He understood that Richard Nixon, a Republican president, was not going to sign a bill, for statehood in the 1970s. So he practiced what I call the politics of strategic moderation. And I laid that out early on in the book to distinguish his approach from the approach of Adam Clayton Powell and the approach of Bill Dawson. And I argue, and I think I make pretty clear in the book, that this approach made this man an effective legislator.
Let me continue to set the table around the 1950s.
Yeah.
I was in elementary school. I remember some of it. Not a lot with clarity, but I remember some, but I've studied it over the years. Brown versus Board of Education was handed down in May of 1954. I was in the second grade. In August of 1954, that's when Charles Diggs runs for Congress, immediately after the Brown decision. And then he runs in and he unseats an incumbent, a white incumbent in that primary. He's then elected in the general election in November of 1954 at age 31. The following year, Emmett Till is murdered. And most of us know that story. If not, we can refresh your memory. And after Till's murder, within months, there was a trial. And who attended the trial? But Congressman Charles Diggs. And then, not to be outdone, 3 months later, Rosa Parks refuses to give up her seat on the bus in Montgomery, and thereby launching the life and work of Martin Luther King Jr. And then that next year, after the first year that Diggs was in Congress, 82 of his colleagues became avowed racists. They signed the Southern Manifesto in public opposition to school integration of public education. 19 senators signed the Southern Manifesto. So that was the environment in the 1950s that Charles Diggs found himself in, but he was not a shrinking violet. If you would speak very briefly, and I wrote this down, he, according to my research, he was the only federal official that showed up for the Emmett Till trial. Rangel didn't come and Clay didn't come, but Diggs was there. Yeah. And it was important that he was there. Yeah.
Yeah, Congressman, I'm glad you brought this up, because it's not only that he was there, but it also sent a signal to what kind of congressman he was going to be looking out in the future. Emmett Till, as you know, was a 14-year-old Chicago boy who went down to Mississippi to visit his family members, and he was lynched by 2 white men who later confessed to the killing. Diggs heard about what was happening down in Mississippi. Let me add that he had visited Mississippi before the killing. His father was from Mississippi, the Charles Diggs Sr. And so he was very moved the congressman by the photographs of Emmett Till's body that Jet Magazine and others showed. So he goes down to Mississippi. In 1955 to observe this trial. And let me tell you something.
Mississippi now, not Michigan.
Yeah, Mississippi. Yeah. And this was a courageous thing to do. Okay? And he wrote about the 5 days that he was down there. The Pittsburgh Courier, the legendary black newspaper, asked him to write about his experience, and he did. And he wrote that those were 5 harrowing, frightening days. Okay? He was a courageous and brave man. He had a tremendous impact on 2 components of what happened down there in Mississippi. He was, as the congressman said, the only federal official that was there at the trial. Let me say this. Mamie Till wrote to President Eisenhower constantly. Eisenhower ignored every letter that Mamie Till, the mother, sent for him. He never spoke out at all about this, about the killing of Emmett Till. Diggs' impact, 2 components that I tease out in the book. One, his presence in the courtroom gave the frightening black witnesses the courage to go through with their testimony. Those black witnesses were frightened to death. And they had to be found and had to be encouraged to come forth and testify. In reading the documents, Congressman, and reading some memoirs of folk who were down there at the time, Diggs, witnesses at the trials quoted as saying to their friends and reporters that looking out in that courtroom and seeing the black congressman out there gave them the courage to speak out and to point an accusing finger at the 2 white men who murdered Emmett Till. That, too, was a brave thing to do. It was so brave, quite frankly, the congressman had to work with Congressman Dawson to get those black witnesses out of Mississippi. And they went to Chicago. They had to leave Mississippi after the trial. So that's one impact, that these witnesses say, looking out there and seeing that powerful black man gave me the courage to stand up, take the oath, and say, yes, those are the 2 white men I saw. The other impact he had is this. He was, as GK said, he was just elected. He just took office in January of 1955. Now, this is the summer. So he's a new black Congress member going down to Mississippi, and Diggs is convinced, and he's quoted as saying this, that the media attention surrounding the trial, that he heightened the media attention by his presence. The one of 3 black congressmen there at the trial, okay? After the verdict, and you all know that they were acquitted, Diggs was very disappointed, and he was interviewed there in Mississippi at the trial, and what he said was very clear. He said that I came to Mississippi to support these black men and women. Moreover, he said that I wanted to demonstrate to America that I, although elected from Michigan, although elected from the 13th district, I plan to be a Congress member for all of black America. And if you look at his career from the Emmett Till trial until 1980 when he resigns from office, you see that's exactly what Charlie Diggs did. He was more than just a congressman from the 13th Congressional District. He was a congressman for all of Black America. And you see this. I have a chapter in the book on the military. Harry Truman desegregated the military in 1948, but if you were Black in the military, you knew that things were still bad. And when Diggs got into office, he got all of these letters from the military people writing about how racist the military was, okay? And he began to work for trying to address those concerns. And these are Black folk not from Michigan writing him. These are folk from all over the country writing the Congressman saying, I'm up for a promotion, but I got denied because I'm Black. Or the sergeant called me the N-word. What can we do about it? So he laid out there early on that he planned to serve all of Black America. And I believe his going to the Emmett Till trial was an early signal of how this congressman was going to behave.
It's just unthinkable that a freshman congressman, 31 years old, 8 months in Congress, would get on an airplane and go to Jackson, Mississippi, and sit on the front row during the trial involving the murder of Emmett Till. It is just unimaginable. During your extensive research for this wonderful, wonderful book, and I hope all of you get at least one copy, or maybe multiple copies for your family and friends, and I'm going to find a way to get a copy to every member of the existing current members of the Congressional Black Caucus. I've already mentioned it to some, hopefully to get you to come to one of their caucus meetings on Wednesday to have a 5 or 10 minute presentation. They're very jealous with their time, so they would cut you off after 10 minutes. Even Marion Orr, they would cut off after 10 minutes.
I only need 10 minutes.
Yeah. Okay, but seriously, you uncovered something in your book that I think is quite remarkable. And if this is a little too controversial to talk about publicly, I understand, but Randall Robinson, I know the name. I think I may have met his brother who might have been in the news business years ago. But Randall Robinson, who later became a major anti-apartheid leader, was the person who actually secretly reported Congressman Diggs for a possible payroll violation. Do I get that right? Yeah, a payroll violation. One of his staff members and friends.
Yes. Okay.
Now, if that's too sensitive, now we can go to the next question.
No, we might as well address it. It's the big. Well, it's one of the big reveals in the book. For 50 years, no one knew how the Justice Department learned about Congressman Diggs' illegal payroll violation. The family didn't know. I talked to Rango and all those members who were there at the time, Congress member, none of them knew. There was some speculation because the congressman was married 4 times. There was some speculation that perhaps some woman called and squealed on them. But for 50 years, we did not know how the Justice Department learned about the payroll violation that would eventually cause the congressman to resign and to serve 7 months in federal prison. We didn't know. Well, there's something called the Freedom of Information Act that allows you to get access to FBI documents. And after 5 years or more of waiting, it took really a long time to get the file. I requested the congressman file as soon as I really started the research, and I got the file. And the file is very extensive. And let me just say, it's a file that's really consistent with all I have learned about the Congress. Nothing there really at all shattering. Except there is in the file the FBI investigation of the payroll violation. And it's very clear, and I lay it out in the book, that, as the congressman said, that Randall Robinson, who at one point served as Congressman Diggs' chief of staff, in March of 1977, picked up the phone and anonymously called the assistant Attorney General for the District of Columbia, so just someone who knows exactly who to call. He didn't call the FBI, he called the right person in this regard, and reported that Diggs had been involved in this payroll kickback scheme. And
Pam Bondi wasn't at the Justice Department then, was she?
No,
Okay, right.
no, he's not. And the person said, Mr. Robinson said, you can't tell anybody that I'm the person. And throughout the trial and even to this day, it's only in my book that we revealed that it was Mr. Robinson who did this. It's in the book, and let me just add that I tried really hard to get Mr. Robinson to talk to me about this. Let me just add, I couldn't figure out why he wouldn't talk to me. It was the strangest thing. Everybody who worked with Congressman Diggs, and I tell you no lie, Charlie Diggs got along with almost everybody. People liked him. This is why he was able to do, people liked him. He was just a very nice guy. And everybody who knew him was shocked by the violation. In fact, Lou Stokes told me, he said, we just couldn't believe Charlie would do anything wrong. They were just shocked. This was uncharacteristic of the congressman. And so I forgot my line of thought, but this is what is revealed. He wouldn't talk. Everybody said, you got to talk to Randall Robinson. So I'm trying to get this guy, and he would not respond to me. And then when I got the FBI file, I said, oh, now I understand why he wouldn't talk to me. And he did not talk. I did get hold of him, and we had some email exchanges. He promised to do an email interview. Now, I'm an academic. I've been doing this for 30 years. I've never in my life conducted an interview over email, okay? But I tried that, but he would not respond. He gave me a statement that I could use in the book. I didn't use it because it simply said he liked the congressman and what have you. Mr. Robinson died, I believe, March of 2023, so he did not get a chance to talk. And when he died, let me just tell you how substantial this guy. When Robinson died, Vice President Kamala Harris's office sent out an official sort of statement on her letterhead recognizing his contribution. If you don't know, Randall Robinson went on to run Trans-Africa, the organization I told you that Diggs had the vision for. Diggs hired the young man to come into his office to build what would become Trans-Africa. That's why Diggs hired Randall Robinson. Randall Robinson had been active in the anti-apartheid movement. Diggs was all into Africa. Randall Robinson's Harvard trained. Diggs brought him in not to be chief of staff, but to organize Diggs' vision for what became Trans-Africa. He got into Diggs' files and simply, I guess, gave them a tip. And within a few months, the congressman was outed, and he would eventually resign from office and would spend 7 months in prison. And let me just say this. I am convinced that Diggs knew who did this to him. I am convinced that he knew who did this to him. But he never said a word to anyone. And here's why. Here's why. Randall Robinson was trying to build Trans-Africa. Diggs was devoted to Africa. And I'm convinced that Diggs knew that if he came out of prison, and he only stayed there 7 months, if he had come out of prison and said, Randall did this to me, that Randall would have had a little more difficult time, I believe, getting black leaders and black folk to rally behind him to form what became this very, very powerful and influential organization called Trans-Africa. Diggs wanted to see Trans-Africa succeed. I'm convinced that he had a strong suspicion, at least, that Randall did this to him, but he was for the cause. I just told you, he loved black people, and he wanted to see Trans-Africa succeed. The man, I'm convinced, had at least a strong suspicion that his former chief of staff is the one who called the Justice Department. But he was so committed to the cause that he wanted to see Trans-Africa succeed. I think that says a lot about the congressman.
Wow. During my years in Congress, I had 5 chiefs of staff. All of them, without exception, would be honored to talk with anyone about their relationship with me when in Congress. They would not avoid an interview at all, I can tell you that. Well, the time has come now for Q&A. I have a few more things I'd planned to ask Dr. Orr, but we'll save that for another day. But right now, we want to hear from you. So let's open it up and see if there are any questions from the audience.
Don't forget, there's a microphone because they're recording it, so please, you must have some questions. Come to the mic. Can you come to the microphone? Please, thank you. Thank you, Congressman, for doing this.
I enjoyed this.
Thank you so much.
3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. It's been wonderful.
Why don't you give the Congressman a hand, please? Thank you.
Better than 9 o'clock in the morning.
No, it's not.
Oh, okay.
Hello, Professor Orr.
Well, good to see you.
It's good
My
to see
former
you too.
student from
After
Duke.
30 years.
Oh my gosh.
Almost. Not quite, but almost.
I taught her at Duke University
Wow.
Yes,
many
he
years
did.
ago.
Yes, he
Wow.
did. He was my favorite and the best professor that I had, and I was so sad when he left and went to
I
Brown.
represented Durham County.
But there you go. Love Durham, love North Carolina.
All right.
So I'm wondering, what gives you a strong suspicion that the congressman knew that it was Randall who had outed him to the Justice Department?
It's just the way things went down that suddenly the FBI shows up, after Mr. Robinson had at one point confronted the congressman because his salary, that is, Mr. Robinson's salary, was lower than some other people on the staff. Okay. And he came in and talked to the congressman. And this is in the trial. He actually says this at the trial, so I'm not speculating. Okay. I know, in fact, that he had a conversation with the congressman about other people's salaries compared to his own. Okay. And I'm convinced that, given that conversation about salaries and what have you, that he had to have a suspicion. And then let me get that, Kirsten, I didn't say this. The congressman also had his FBI file.
Oh.
I know from the documentations that while he was in prison, in fact, he sent a letter to Bonnie here. That's right. There's a letter where he tells his former staff member that I have requested my FBI file. Okay? 10 years later, he tells an interviewer, I have my FBI file. So I know he requested it in the 1980s. And then he tells an interviewer in 1990 that I have my FBI file. The interviewer asked him to send it to him, but I don't think he ever did. But yeah, so that's why I really think Charlie Diggs knew. And let me just say, he was a really good man, and he cared about people. And my suspicion is he probably didn't want to hurt the young man either. I'm convinced that Charlie knew. He didn't tell me this. His family members never told me this. Because I don't believe he talked to the family about this. But when you just look at the evidence and you look at human nature and how people act, you kind of come away thinking, he had to know.
Okay.
And older black men are protective of younger African-American scholars. I've learned that over the years. Has that been part of your experience?
Oh, sure, yes. Exactly, yes. Please.
Dr. Orr, I hope I don't get too emotional, but thank you so much. I worked with you a little bit on this. I worked for Charlie Diggs for 7.5 years. I started as a receptionist. Charlie loved Black people, and he loved all people. And we were very close over the years. But I started as a receptionist. I sat in front of a kente cloth that was my backdrop. And there were many people, of course, who came. And he would come out. I would announced to go into the congressman, and he always came out and said, did you meet Sister Gallagher? And some people were very, who didn't like me at all for that was Dick Gregory. Dick Gregory. He said, what are you doing here? I said, I work here. I was. Congressman Diggs taught me, I miss him so much. I think about him now. He's rolling in his grave. Let's hope not. But, you know, I mean, I remember, so I started as a receptionist and then I became constituent services. Now, he was a legislator, but what kept him going forever was his constituent services. He used to say to me, Sister Gallagher, it's a good thing you're white, because if you were black with that mouth, honey, you'd be dead. So I was a little more liberal than he. And we would have, I can remember, I told you, we had so many great discussions. And in letters, so when you work for a congressman, you never sign your own name. It's always, I showed you my files. But he always said, capitalize black. Don't ever put a small b. Make sure you capitalize black. One of the many things. And the last thing I want to say, he was a very shy man. He had very bad eyesight, which is why he didn't become a Tuskegee Airman, which he really wanted to do. And it's one of my jobs as constituent service was to try to get all these kids into the academies. And one day I went into him and I said, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to do this. I hate the military. He said, what? And we had a big discussion about it. And he explained how important it was. I said, I'll do it. I work for you. I'll do whatever you tell me. But he said, you got to get these kids in the academy, buddy. You got to do it. Of course I did. We were a little successful. But there were times that we would be walking. He would say, walk and talk. We'd walk from his office to the floor. And people would be waving to him. And he wouldn't wave back. And I'd say, Mr. Chairman, wave. There's Congressman Dinkle. Wave. He said, I can't see him. I said, I don't care. Wave. Just wait. He was not a hail fellow, well-met guy. He was very shy and very reserved and so kind. And we stayed friends until he died. I'll never forget his funeral.
Powerful story.
He was wonderful. And thank you for this book.
Thank you so much. And thank you for helping me.
Thank you. All right. Very good. And that's been recorded, right?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes, one of the things I learned of his demeanor, he was a very quiet, in fact, you would not have sort of picked him out to become some national leader. He was as a young man, a high school student, very unassuming, quiet demeanor kind of guy. Yeah. Other questions? I think we still have some time.
Please. My driver doesn't get here till 4:05. Please. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you, will you tell the story of how you came across Charlie Diggs and sort of the intersection of coming across him as a political scientist and how that connects back to your youth?
Okay. Thank you. Very good question from my wife, who I dedicated the book to along with our daughter. Ramona was very so supportive. I did all my work in the basement. That's my office in the basement at home. My home studies in the basement, and Ramona went around telling folk that Congressman Diggs lives in our basement, what she would say. A lot of folk ask this question, how did I learn about Congressman Diggs? I learned about the congressman when I was about 18 years old. Oh. That's right. I did my undergraduate work at Savannah State College, which is a historically black college in my hometown of Savannah, Georgia. And at Savannah State, we had on the faculty there a brilliant political scientist who changed my life. And in all of his courses, he taught many of the courses at Savannah State. His name was Haynes Walton Jr. I got to get his name out there. Haynes, like the T-shirt we wear, Walton. He was a brilliant political scientist, and we had him for 25 years at Savannah State. Professor Walton literally created the subfield of political science today, the subfield of black politics. And so I learned about this man, Diggs, when I was an undergraduate, and I learned about his contributions. And then I went to graduate school to study political science, and I learned still more about him. And when I discovered there was no book on him, I said, my goodness, somebody need to do something. And then when I discovered the fact, I didn't say this, he left his papers at Howard. Did I say that already? You know, all this material was there for me to work with. So I learned about this man, and I knew he was significant from my mentor, Haynes Walton Jr., who really, really emphasized to us as undergraduates in political science how important it is for us to lift up Black leadership and to recognize Black leaders. And this man came up in almost all of Professor Walton's classes. If you're talking about Africa, he came up. You're talking about urban politics, DC would come up. You talk about Congress, his founding of the Congressional Black Caucus came up. So I left Savannah State knowing that this guy was somebody that we ought to know more about. And when I went to Maryland and studied political science, I learned even more. And I said, my goodness, no journalist, no historian going to do this? And so I did something. Let me add, political scientists don't write biographies. Let me get stressed to that. That's not something that we are trained to do. We do voting behavior. We may do, if we study a congressman, we may look at his or her voting style or voting behavior. We don't do political biographies. We don't do archival research. And so I was really going out on a limb doing this, but let me just tell y'all something, and my wife would tell you. I had so much fun writing this book. It was just a joy for the last 10 years to do the research and to write and to discover new and things. It was just a wonderful, wonderful thing to do, a good experience, a different kind of writing. You know, I mean, just say this to you who have not read the book yet. And I think you can help me with this, Congressman, okay? I wrote this book so it'd be readable to almost everybody, okay? And one thing I like about this book, you turn the first page, there's an advanced praise page by some very prominent endorsers. But here's the point. Almost all of them use the word readable, that this is a readable biography. And I really worked really hard to make this accessible to everyone, but at the same time, because I'm at Brown, it has to be scholarship. So the scholarship is deep and heavy, but it's something that all of y'all can read. In fact, someone at my church the other day said, Professor, an 8th grader could read this book. And I said, okay, yes, I think so. But it's a really, really, I'm very proud of the fact that these endorsers noted how readable the book is. And I say that to you, so you might want to dig into it. It's an easy read, and it goes and flows. This was an interesting character. I mean, he was married 4 times, okay? His father committed suicide. He was down at this interesting trial. There are some very interesting scenes that he was great friends with Dr. King, very close friends. And then, check this out. Newt Gingrich, check this out. Newt Gingrich gets his start in politics by attacking Charlie Diggs. There's a chapter in my book entitled Diggs Meets Newt. Read it. It was Newt Gingrich who came out and began to attack Charlie Diggs and led the Congress to censor Diggs. When Diggs was censored in 1979, he was it was 60 years before someone had been censored in the House. I start the book off with the censored scene. This was devastating. Today's censors but back in the day, he was the first man in 60 years. And that's the most severe punishment in the House, okay? So it's an interesting read, and I'm just telling you, if you don't be afraid that I'm an academic, but I really work hard, you can get into this and enjoy it. And as the Congressman said, don't buy one book, buy several books. Any other questions?
After my first day of reading the book, I had a telephone call with Dr. Orr that night, and he said, what you think about it so far? I said, it's great, I'm going to continue. What do you think about Newt? I said, is Newt in the book? He said, keep on reading. Then he said, did you make the connection on Randall Robinson? And I said, What? He said, keep on reading. And that intrigued me, and I finished it in 3 days.
Well, let me say this. The congressman, you're right, he read the first 16 chapters,
Yeah.
and you sent me an email,
Yeah.
and I have it.
Yeah.
You said, Professor, this should be a movie.
I did say that.
You did.
And I stand by that. I stand by that.
Yeah.
You know, the thought just occurred to me as you were talking a minute ago, and I haven't shared this with you, but I attended the first Congressional Black Caucus dinner, and Charlie Diggs was the chairman of the caucus, and it happened a few blocks from where we are right now. No, at the Sheridan Park.
Sheridan Park. It's in the book.
Over on Woodley. The first Congressional Black Caucus dinner, and Ozzie Davis and Ruby Dee were the keynote speakers that evening. And the title of the speech was, "It's not the man, but the plan.
That's right, yes.
It's not the rap, but the map." And it was $100 for a ticket, which to me then sounded like $10,000. But anyway, I just wanted to put that out there. We have time for one more question. Okay. And if he's brief, we have time for 2 more questions.
So,
Yeah.
quick question about all the information that you've collected from the archives and so forth. Is there anything that you couldn't put in the book because of, constraints or restrictions or whatnot? What was left out that you wish you could have put in the book?
Yeah, I like that question. A lot.
Yeah.
A lot. The most difficult challenge for me was cutting down. It was just, they gave me a contractual number of words, and I had to get the book down to the contractual words. So, for example, I cut out a lot of the interesting history about his family. This man's family, public service in his family goes back to before the damn Civil War. Yeah, very fascinating. Back in Mississippi, his great-great-grandfather was a reconstruction of Justice of the Peace in Mississippi. His great-great-grandmother, there's a book out on her, she taught slaves how to read. Her name was Lillian Granderson, and there's a book by her about her called The Midnight Teacher. Quick story. She was a slave in Kentucky, and the kids of the slave owners taught the young lady how to read. She got sold to Mississippi, and she started a school at night and taught slaves how to read and write in Mississippi. Okay? So Diggs' notion and capacity for public service is deep in his DNA. His grandfather was a Baptist missionary to Liberia. Okay? So Africa has been close to Diggs' heart. That's why I said the Diggs name was just a good name in Detroit and deep roots in the soil of Mississippi. Yeah.
That was a very, very good question.
It was, yes. A lot I left out. Let me say real quickly.
Okay.
I had to leave stuff out about the father. So I'm going to put that in the book. I'm going to do a book.
Talking about leaving stuff out. The first day I was in Congress, Charlie Rangel came over to me and said, "Welcome here, young man. Do you play poker?" And I said, "Mr. Rangel, I don't play cards. I may play bid whist every now and then." And he said, "Well, all of us founding members of the Congressional Black Caucus, we had a poker club, and we would take each other's money." Did you run across any card-playing proclivities on the part of Charlie Diggs? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Charlie Diggs, in fact, I'll just add this. I think one of the challenges he faced was he was a gambler.
Yeah.
Not in carts, but in the trace horses and racetracks. Some of his closest friends commented after his downfall that they thought he had a real problem with gambling. I'll say this, doing this book gets emphasized to me and hit home the fact how complex human beings are. We are complex sort of entities as men and women, and you know, and reading about the life of Congressman Diggs just hammers home to me the complexity of human life, the challenges, the complexity of human life, and then, you know, the whole dynamic we're living in this very complex world, you know, and that's what we see. That's what we see in this man, a complex man who had his faults, but who, without question, loved America. He was an American patriot. And if you read this account of him, what you see him doing is trying to push America to the place that its founding fathers seemingly aspired to be, bending that arc, if you will, of a more perfect union. That's what he was doing. That's what he was doing in South Africa. He was raising this question about why would we as a nation want to be aligned with that racist regime in South Africa that was subjugating its majority population under this apartheid regime. So what he was doing was pushing America and saying, why is it that black folk in Mississippi are being treated the way they're treated? So he was an American patriot, but he was a complex, flawed individual like many of us, imperfect, but loved his country. And let me say this, and no, I gotta say this, and sacrifice his family and his business. Because if you're off in Africa and doing all these things, there's some things you can't do with your children and what have you. So here's a man who sacrificed his family and the House of Diggs funeral home for the work he was doing, the public service he was providing. I want to underscore that, the sacrifice he made as a public servant. He didn't have to do it, but he did it because he loved America and because he wanted to see America improve and to be better. I better stop. I can keep going because I think this is great. So.
We were told at the outset that we had a hard stop at 4 o'clock, and it's now 4 o'clock, and we're going to have to end this session. But it's been very powerful, very riveting, and I've enjoyed every minute of it, even at 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank all of you.
And let me just say to you, sir, and I think I have standing and authority to say this, on behalf of the Congressional Black Caucus, the 62 men and women who serve in that body every day, who continue to keep the dreams of the founders of our caucus alive, we want to thank you for your research. Thank you for the hours and days and years it took to get it right. And you got it right, you got it published, and now you have given it to the world. And I just want to thank you on behalf of the CBC and all of us who believe in this democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.